So let's hit the spacebar and do playback again and look at our animation, what we've got so far. And it's pretty cool, but right in here, right in that area, I would say I sort of have a problem with how obfuscated or hidden the background, the video is. It's sort of, I don't know, just like the back of it just disappears right behind this logo. And I'd like to see more of what's going on with this guy, actually with both guys. All right, and so I can kind of play around with this and see what would happen, let's say, if we had a blend mode. Now I can tell you right now, I think that this is probably going to be too busy to have a blend mode through the whole thing, but right now I'm really most concerned about seeing if I can get maybe some kind of blend mode to happen somewhere in here, starting around here where there's a break, so that I can start to see through this logo a little bit and it becomes a little bit more integrated but also sort of fractured in a way, right? So what I can do to mess around with the blend mode is I can change by adding the blend mode here. And if you don't see this, by the way, then what you need to do is you need to right click where it says layer name, right? And you need to click on where, or hover over columns, and you need to make sure that modes is selected. So if you have, by default, I think modes is disabled, right? And so you probably see something that looks like that. So you right click where it says layer name, go to columns, and then click on modes, and it'll show you the blend mode options. Now, if I automatically just started messing with this, one of the things that you will realize right off the bat is that this is white, and so there are a lot of the blend modes just aren't going to do much of anything, because there's no color involved. And so the concept of a blend mode, if you're not familiar with it, like from say Photoshop or something, is that it takes the foreground color that's in the layer and then it does a blending algorithm uh, based on the colors that are behind it. So like it would blend whatever the color for logo is with the colors that are inside the skydive layer that is below it. But the problem is if there's no color, some of the algorithms just don't work very well, right? They don't have color information to sort of map against the colors that are in the background. That's going to be true with black too. So a lot of times the things that will work with black and white are going to be based on luminosity of some sort. So, or like differences, or, where it would help with a knockout or something. So, but if you don't know what all those different things are, like you don't know how to anticipate what it's going to do, then you just play with it, right? And so, and then always remember you can always just go back to normal, right, later. So if I click on darken, it sort of works, sort of doesn't, right? It sort of is working a little bit because we've got a drop shadow, but not really. You can kind of see through it, which is sort of cool, but I don't want to be able to see through it, here for sure. But don't worry about that because I've got a solution for that. But like here, it's actually kind of interesting that you can see through it a little bit. That's not bad. But I don't know. It's kind of cool, but at the same time, it's also hard to see the logo. It's hard to see the guy. So I don't know if darken's what I want. Multiply is a different version of darken, where it typically will make it darker than darken, which is sort of ironic, I think. Um, we can look at color burn, which is actually pretty interesting. And the reason that this is kind of working even at all is because remember how I added color in the dark halo number 2. I added actually sort of like a blue color. That's why you're getting some of this color at all, right? And so you start to get this really interesting effect in here. And you might like some of this, right? It's not what I originally did. I think I did something like a difference, but you can play with all these different things. Let's take a look at some of these others just so I can show you. And you can see how all of them are really, really quite different. Okay. And then I would always recommend that as you're doing these kinds of things that you try all of them. Don't assume that just because they sound similar, they're going to have similar behaviors. But also scrub through the timeline to see how they affect different parts of the video. Right, so if I do add, you know, this is where you can see that these are bracketed, like darken through darker color. This section literally is going to be about darkening the dark parts, right, with the color that's behind. This next section is going to be generally about making things a little bit lighter. And so you might end up getting some results that you're not really expecting also. But just because you do expect certain results, maybe you think that you're really good at this and you know all of these, I would still always take a look at all of them. Anyway, I'm going to just skip over. Now overlay, soft light, and these kind of do a different kind of blending. Overlay sometimes will allow a little bit of the material to show through, but generally it'll create literally an overlay so that you can see it a little bit more, but you see a little bit also that comes through. And so the overlay right there is actually pretty nice, but right here I'm losing too much of the logo. It's almost as if it stripped out the shadows. In fact, it did strip out the shadows when it goes into its blending mode. You could look at soft light again. It's very, it's almost like a watermark for soft light. Hard light usually is pretty harsh, but it might actually be the kind of thing that you need. Hard light in this case is very similar to the original without any kind of blend mode added. So sometimes it'll do something where the blend mode doesn't even appear to have an effect. And so I'm just going to kind of cruise through some of these. That's linear light. Vivid light usually is pretty significantly different. All right, it's not the effect I'm going for. I know what I think I want, but I'm just going through a lot of these with you. Pen light oftentimes will gray things out. In this case, it's not because we have plenty of color in there. But in this case, it's actually softening the shadow so that it feels softer and bluer. It's getting rid of some of the darkness in there. Hard mix usually does something that's very kind of, like to think of it as like punk rock, right? It gets very posterized where it limits the tonal range a lot. It starts to break down into pixels quite often. Difference is something that you might look for, right? In this case, this is, I think, what I actually want. So I don't want difference here because that's just way too busy, right? But then, like right in here, this is actually really quite lovely. And difference, what it's doing is it's literally finding the difference of the blue that's behind it. And the complement of that blue is going to be sort of like an orange color, right? And so that's actually quite lovely because it's pulling up the complement, in this case, in the opposite color range, right? And then here it goes through sort of these beautiful colors, and then we get something that's dark. I can kind of see through it, but it's also like really energetic and exciting at the same time, and it's okay that I can't 100% read it. And I get this really interesting feeling, right? And then I'm not so worried about this part right here because I think that this is where I'm going to have it kind of explode, right? So this is the one that I ended up landing on, just so you know. But you could try some of these others to see how they also behave. There's classic difference. It doesn't really feel any different. Exclusion is very similar oftentimes to difference, but in this case, what it does is it's called solarization. It's solarizing back there, and I don't want a solarized feeling. Subtract will literally do the opposite quite often. Divide, hue, saturation, play with all these, okay? All right, so, but let's just go ahead and we're going to settle on difference. At least that's what I'm going to settle on. And the thing, though, that I mentioned before that's a problem is that on this layer, I don't want that difference to be happening right here. There's just way too much going on. It's too busy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. And I can either do on a Mac Command D, or on Windows it would be Control D. And that'll work. The other thing I could do, I'm going to undo that real quick, is I can select the layer and I can go to edit and then I can choose duplicate from here. And you see here's the shortcut off to the right. Anyway, so yeah, what I'm going to choose first off is now I've got two layers that are going to show me difference, right? And this is what's really interesting is because now I've got two layers that are filtering each other. This isn't what I ultimately want, but it's actually pretty interesting for you to see, is that it's doing a difference of the layer below it that has difference that is doing the difference of the layer below it, right? And so it's like combining all of these differences and it's knocking stuff out, which actually can create a pretty cool effect. It's not necessarily the one I'm going for, but it's something that you could play around with. And sometimes this is the way to find the happiest accidents, is that you duplicated something and you weren't expecting the blend mode to knock the other blend mode back so much, and it's like the coolest thing ever happens. And right, and but anyway, that's not necessarily what I'm trying to have happen right here. So the reason I'm doing this is when I duplicate a layer, it duplicates everything with it, including, you see including that both of these are 3D, and it also included the effects, which is why that difference knockout is working so well, because it actually, if you remember, it has color on this second halo, this dark halo, it has color, and that's why the difference is allowing it with this very, very soft spread. Remember, we have a 70 softness. And so because that soft spread is spread out so far, it's actually able to interact with the color that's in the background quite well. If it weren't for that color, then this black and then this white up here wouldn't be doing a whole lot in terms of making changes to color. Anyway, the idea though is that I can use this top layer if I set it to normal. Right, if I do that and then I go through, it looks like nothing has changed really, right? But what I can do is I can have this come in white. I can keyframe the opacity so that right about here it starts to fade out, so that what I actually see is the layer that is below it. I can turn off the visibility. I can just toggle that off real quick so that it sort of transitions over to this, right? And you get this kind of interesting effect, right, with the blend mode. And so that's the idea, and that's what we're going to accomplish in the next video.